You guys know what time it is. It is time to come back and talk some. I said it's time to come back and talk some. IT with Glenn and Tony.
Love the song.
Talking some IT. Heck yeah. Let it Tony take it away from here.
Got the ooze.
Oh, did you figure out what key that's in?
I'm thinking G, A flat, and then E flat and C.
Oh, E flat. Damn, you're good.
Those are just the notes I hear. I mean, I don't know that it's right, but
it's close.
That's where that melody felt like it should go. Which also means that there should be, it's hard to say what there should be.
I'm definitely going to have some fun with that one. That's a nice bouncy one. I love what she did.
Exactly. And we got the other camera set up over here so we can see a little bit of the keyboard. I was talking about these little buttons over here, have the drums over here. We get the big old drums if we want those. Plus it has the built-in.
See what you're playing.
And you can see what I'm playing. And now with these, I didn't think Meticulous would pick those up because it doesn't know what those are. But as I'm hitting notes, though, it will tell us.
Yeah, the only way you could get those to pick up is if you set Meticulous to channel 10. It'll pick up those on channel 10.
Yeah. The other thing that I could do is instead of using those pads, I could actually just use one of the drum sounds.
You could actually use
my keyboard is.
Yeah, your keyboard kit.
Right. Exactly. And then it'll be reading each of the notes because, like, the maracas would be that one. And, the tiny little, I guess those are small toms, maybe rototoms almost, would be those two. As opposed to the bongos or the congas. Like, there's just a whole layout. Like, you have so many keys to work with, like 61 keys, and it looks like it's using about 50 for the drum sounds.
A standard MIDI set, it really doesn't change across kits. So once you know the dynamics of where the bass, snare, and the toms and crashes are, you can switch kits, and they're pretty consistent across all the kits. Yeah,
and these have 160 through 167 on here are all drum kit layouts. And like I said, that would be like, and then you'd be seeing it on the Meticulous though. That would be F and F sharp. But that's where you get all the different sounds. Fun to play with. And again, there's a bunch of different ones. So the different drum sets, I'm sure, have nuance differences. Different cowbell. All that.
You gotta give me some starting chords that are reggae-ish.
There you go.
Or Caribbean.
And actually, it's for that, it's not even so much the chords as it is the actual what we're doing with it. And that's where in the left hand, what we'll be looking for is like a bass sound and doing just a major arpeggio where you're going from the root 3-5 and you're kind of hanging out on the 5. So if I go to even if I use the ooze, say if we were doing it just in the key of C, even for example, in C major, and then a 1-4 and a 5, kind of be doing like so those are like the general ideas as far as the timing, kind of like kind of starting in from the low. Come back to the C.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Up to the G.
Is that the Rugrats fucking? Yeah.
And then a lot of cases, while someone's doing that with, if somebody had a guitar, for example, or even on a piano or what have you, they'd be doing little chirp chords, so that while the bass is going, running through that part, they'd be just doing like little on the off beat. Basically just running little chirps like that as the chords change as well, of course. And that's where
could also be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It all depends on what kind of rhythm you're looking for. The bossa nova is always good for that. There's a bunch of different ones. I was trying to see if there are any of the yeah, they do have one for reggae, and let's see what their idea of a reggae rhythm is. 081. They say at 120 this would be. Now here's where the if you go into what they have normal, and they also have Casio chord mode. If I was in Casio chord mode and it's coming around like this, and we were talking about playing in C, I could just do this and then tell it it's C. Song in C. And then when you want to change to F, so I'm only hitting one key to go make a change, and then back to the C after this. Then this time we go to the G. And then down the F. Something like that rolling around, and then you can, if it wanted to. And that was just going from the F to the F sharp to the G on the way back around. We'll go back to normal mode to stop that. But that's as far as, that's using their rhythm and that Casio chord mode to just basically be able to hit one note in the left hand for whatever key I'm in or whatever chord I want them to play. And they'll play in that key and add that instrumentation that you just heard. So it makes it much more interesting than a plain old metronome. At least to me it does. That's what I was talking about. Yes, that little bounce. I would even take that left hand note and play it an octave lower. Yep. Because that sounds more like a bass bouncing with another instrument.
Baby, I got a little reggae.
You got a little in you there for sure. What else do we have here?
Smoking.
There you go.
I'm
Yaman.
getting there.
Yaman. Let me see what else we got here. 82. That's a punta rhythm. And let's see what they do with the chord mode on this one. Very much so. It's quite fast. See, now if I brought this down to say 80.
Now it almost feels more like reggae again.
Yep. And then if we change it, like right now we're in C still, then I go to F. And then back to C. Up to the G. And just going back and forth. That's how you can take something that maybe doesn't feel like it would be fitting, and you can just change the rhythm, or change the tempo, I should say, in this case.
Yeah, that's a good way to practice bouncing, because that really does make me bounce different.
Exactly. Exactly.
Gives me a different groove.
Very cool. And that's where, again, just experimenting with different rhythms and taking different speeds. And that's where a lot of times when we are trying to get something together out in Pennsylvania, for example, when we're getting together with Cousin Jeff and trying to get stuff written out, a lot of times we'll just throw a rhythm on, and it'll be kind of the right feel, like if it has the right kind of bass pattern to it or the right kind of flow, rhythmically back and forth that we're looking for. We'll just go with whatever we start with there and try to run with that. But a lot of times it'll be, whatever we started with. It's like, okay, wait, take that. I like that idea, but go halftime. So like if it's at 120, bring it down to 60, or if it was, or double it, go out to 240.
Establishing that like initial rhythm metronome. I was talking with some of the guys in the back the other night about that. Like, even if you just find like a basic MIDI beat that's close to what you're looking for to play your riff. And then once you get your parts down the way you want, replacing that standard beat with a beat that's closer to what you're looking for gets easy.
Exactly. Having the general idea, or having enough of a general idea to be able to get it down, even if it is just the metronome, or even if it is just the very simple, a clave, just going
well, the
just to
metronome
keep the
is
timing going.
The metronome is the most basic beat you can start with.
Yeah, and that's where I like to go with some of these, a little bit more. How about a Viennese waltz, for example? If we went to rhythm 65 at 120.
Oh, a waltz, huh?
And a waltz at 120 feels kind of slow, but at the same time, because it's a waltz, going back, doom, chop, chop, doom, chop, chop, kind of. It's kind of back and forth between a C and an F like that, but it's that kind of a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, getting that bounce going.
This is good for me because this is 3/4, right?
This is a 3/4 time. Yeah. You get that triplet feel.
That's one I need to practice.
And that's where, again, this is at 120. And so you can feel that kind of back and forth. But what happens if we bring it up to 160?
Really doesn't feel fast for a waltz.
And there's 160 there. Yep, that's the idea. At the same time, that does feel kind of fast for that style, but at the same time, like you said, not too fast. Doesn't feel like, oh my God, I can't play that fast. It just feels like, okay, maybe that's a little fast
compared to other styles at 160.
Exactly. If we played a metal style or something else there, I wonder what they have for. What about? They have R&B. How about that? 49. Let's see what that looks like. At 120. And let's see what the Casio chords look like in the key of G. About that bass line they're using too.
Ace of Spades was asking, how would a time signature affect a trick like this?
Let's see, which kind of trick? The shifting around. The time signature, as far as right now, we're playing at 120, and if we're playing that at 120 and we shifted that up.
Well, what if you change the actual time signature? Like that waltz was a 3/4 beat.
Oh, right.
If you change it to a 4/4 waltz, is it still a waltz?
Well, that's the thing, is a waltz almost by definition is 3/4. Like that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's like a defining characteristic of a waltz. So you could change the
different kind of beat.
Exactly.
Make it 4/4.
Exactly. As you change that would change essentially the style. There could be 4/4 time waltzes, but to me, the whole idea of a waltz, whether there's different styles or not, they're just variations in my idea of waltzes to be variations of that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 feel.
And that's got to be because like it's based off of dance, right? Like this is a dance style of music. So
sure.
when people are dancing a waltz, it's designed to complement the dance.
And some of my favorite Tom and Jerry episodes are when they're, and when the cat would play, the mouse would waltz, and Jerry would waltz around. So every time Tom would learn how to play, and he learned how to play the waltz in 3 steps. After 3 steps, he was playing this huge piece, and Jerry would come out dancing, and then as soon as he'd go chase him, then he'd wake up and he'd get away every time.
I actually learned a Beethoven song watching Tom and Jerry. There was an episode where he was trying to get Jerry, and Jerry was jumping around on the keys.
Yep.
And they were playing this Beethoven piece, and you know, basically Tom was trying to pound on Jerry, but Jerry kept moving, so he kept hitting keys, and it was one of the first songs I wanted to learn.
And I'm not sure if that was the same one, but there was one where Tom's on stage performing and Jerry's in the piano. And at one point he's trying to push Tom. So he just breaks a couple of hammers off and just starts playing even faster.
When he was inside the piano, yeah, with the hammers.
Yep. Love it.
Yeah, I love those.
And that's where really cartoons and classical music, that whole conglomeration, the way those came together, or the way they complement each other, I should say, was awesome. And the fact that they scripted that all into the way that went together, very cool.
Ooh, 6/8. Now that's interesting.
6/8 and 3/4 are definitely a little different.
3/4 might. Well, it's still an even timing. So I don't think
in ways they feel the same.
3/4, 6/8 is still breaks up evenly, and
it's more like two triplets in the place of the 1, 2, 3. It's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, and you kind of get that. Yeah, so it's 6, but it still overall has that same triplet feel, kind of, but it's a doubled triplet feel to me, and that's where there can be differences. Whether you're going with the 6/8, going from 4/4, that's difficult. 4/4 to 6/8 again, that would kind of change the whole feel of what's going on. There are songs that do it though.
Like 3/4 and 7/8 might feel closer together because they're those weird timings. I mean, these are the ones that I have the toughest time with because you've almost got to count two things in your head at the same time.
Yep, like that 3 on 4 thing we were talking about last week.
Yeah, that spent 30 years trying to wrap my brain around those.
Yeah, exactly. And I see some people out in the chat for some shout outs there. Lord Ace of Spades, Baby Girl, Quintessa, hello. How's everybody doing? Sometimes the signature makes the BPM.
Like when he changes the BPMs, it seems to bend and have variation in that way. And it would. It would.
And again, depending on the style, depending on what the rest of the band is doing. And that's another thing that with just again with the one we were just looking at it as an example there, telling it to do Casio chords and telling it to jump in this case for the R&B at in the key of G, listening to what the bass is doing, you're getting that G, the D, F, and G, and that gets you a nice little bounce. Now you hear it change over. We're down here, sounds different than up here, and that's because it's still in that chord mode. If I go back to normal mode, that probably sounds like 50 different songs right there. Because once you got that little bounce going,
that is Devo's "I've Been Working."
And again, if you can get that feel in the left hand, and that's getting a full octave in. And it doesn't really matter if you flip over the fingers. Like I went from, I'm using the thumb on the F and then coming up over it with the index finger for that G to make it easier to reach instead of trying to go and like move the whole hand up and down like that. Makes it easier to get back to that low G again. But that kind of a bounce there is one of those things that you can learn from any of these styles that they have. You can throw the style on, listen to it a little bit, and if you just hear, like in this case, you hear what the bass is doing. You can also hear what the chords are doing, where there's kind of like little splash chords up top. Also where you can get a ton of mileage out of things like just a regular pentatonic scale. If you can figure out what pentatonic works for the key that you're in, you could just hang out there all day and just bounce that around and relax on whatever it is, you know, in that style or different styles. And that's where to me it's a lot of fun to like explore all the different rhythms that they have in there. And again, this is one of those keyboards where most of the keyboards I used to have didn't have rhythms in them. They were more specifically about the sounds themselves, as opposed to ways to just have accompaniment on demand. But now that the more I look into what I have available here, I'm like, this is pretty cool. I like it.
The more you want to play with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Same here, man. I've had this keyboard now for almost 14 years, and I'm still just scratching the surface of it.
Yep. And this one's pretty basic in terms of what it can do. Like it doesn't have that many knobs and dials that you can really get into, but there's still a lot of stuff that you can modify, even just with the options that I have here. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I do like the sounds on this thing though.
Now, with one long steady note, Ace of Spades asking here, one long steady note and change the time signature to make the note shift. Probably not. It's more like that note just kind of tied over. So it's more of it's a tying over as a whole note or a whole dotted, dotted whole note or what.
I mean, for sheet music, technically, it would shift because sheet music is trying to show how long a note's being held. So if you change the time signature, the same amount of time holding the note changes on the sheet. But in sound, changing the BPM isn't going to change the effect of the sound itself.
Right.
Unless you're dealing with wave. If you're dealing with a wave audio file and you go change your BPM, you're stretching or squeezing the wave in the process. So yes, a stretched wave sound will work. Mm-hmm. But in MIDI, there's no wave. MIDI is just a note data. So it doesn't matter if I'm hitting a C at 4/4 or C at 3/4.
Right. And even the note duration is about, how long you're actually holding it. It doesn't really have to do with the time signature of the song, but the signature would be more about what the drums are doing while you're holding that note. That's what would make the perceptible change in feel. And that's where you were talking about 7/8 even before, doing something like the song Money by Pink Floyd is one of those songs that has an odd time signature. I believe it's 7/8. Or is it 9/8?
Actually, there's a couple of times signatures in that song by the time you're done.
Exactly. And then that's where in just, for like 2 measures, they'll be in 2/2 or 2/4 timing or whatever, just to get things to come back around to the right downbeat when they're trying to get back to whatever the original timing was. But that's a good one to study for getting into odd time signatures as well.
And, when you're changing time signatures like that, which is a cool thing in songwriting, it produces a certain kind of mood shift, and it's very effective, but it's difficult. And sometimes whether it sounds like what you're looking for isn't always going to be the case. That's why you don't see a ton of songs out there doing that. Yep. You'll see like the occasional Pink Floyd come around and do something like that. Rush, they used to do all sorts of crazy time changes to sound more progressive.
Yeah, and you can have a really big change in feel from one section of a song to another by doing a big time change, or a big change in how you're holding note duration. Even if it goes from ba 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 chords where you're hitting them very fast, going ones where you're much more holding them, or strings or things like that. You can change,
and that's actually more common. You'll see people do halftime, or especially in metal, you see that all the time with some of this speed metal, where they'll just cut the tempo in half, have a part where they hold the chords, and then next part they go back to high speed. It's basically just going from 160 to 80 back to 160, but it's still 4/4.
Right. And that's what ties the whole thing together. And in a lot of cases in those things, that's also kick drum on, is it 8 times, 16 times a measure? I mean, they're in your face with that double kick a lot of times.
Yeah.
In a lot of those styles.
And if you are shifting BPMs like that, it's rare that you're going to go in unequal jumps. So, even denominations, like going from 80 to 40 instead of going like 80 to 75.
Right.
When you go in uneven BPM shifts, even an untrained ear can hear it's weird.
Right. That's also why a lot of the things are in 120, because 120 is one of those magic numbers where 120 divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15. It's like, what? So many different things can divide evenly into it. So you can get all those different subdivisions to sound natural but like you said, if you dropped it from 120 to 119, it probably won't sound quite right. I mean, it might sound okay, but.
And when I'm trying to find the like BPM that I'm playing in, I try to avoid going into the like odd number BPMs. Sometimes I have to, because I just need it a smidge slower or a smidge faster than where I'm playing. But it does make for it makes things not break out as evenly as you're laying out the rest of your parts. So it is easier to actually stay in nice even. most of music likes to be in even denomination. That's why like the 2/4s, 4/4s, 4/8s are more popular than the 3/4s and 7/8s. And
and that's before we even start getting into the 440 versus the 432.
Yeah. Oh, dude, the tuning.
Tunings, yep. What the actual notes are.
Well, see, in 432, I bet you a lot of this actually sounds better even in the uneven approach. 432 really just feels more natural to me, to my ears.
Some people swear by it. Some people say it's the worst thing ever. There was also slightly altered tunings where it's not changing the tunings to an entirely different degree, but I'm trying to think of who it was. Who basically had a certain tuning where, this string is always going to be, they tune that one 3 cents sharp, and this one they always tune 5 cents flat. They're like small changes that they would make compared to the usual tuning.
Like say on a guitar, instead of the drop tuning approach, they actually adjust at the cents level.
Yeah, at the cents level. And that was one where I'd have to look it up again. The name is escaping me right now. I wanted to say Taylor tuning, but it might not be.
Well, there's certain stringed instruments where you could get like really cool results if you wanted to make your guitar say sound sitarish or like a mid-eastern stringed instrument. That kind of approach might get you that kind of sound.
Yep, exactly. And that's one of those things where somebody was also talking about the G string. I was talking to one of the guys about how they tune their guitar, what kind of strings they use on their guitar. And they were talking about the fact that with most guitars that you would look at, they have the fattest 3 strings are wound, where they kind of look like a cheese grater style. Like if you were to grind your finger across, it would be a cheese grater. And the other 3 are not wound, where they are just smooth. So if you were to grind your finger, like it would be nice and smooth down the string. But some string sets or some string sizes will have that G string also be wound, and that changes how the intonation works.
The heavier gauges?
It makes it seem a little heavier. Yeah, I would think that the heavier sets would have them, or you can also just get a custom string where it's a wound G in this particular set. And they'll usually even say it on the set. Like if you're looking at the sizes, it'll have a special, notation next to it that it is a different G string that has the windings on it.
It's more like a thong.
It's kind of like the other fat strings are. But one of the things is people were talking about it with certain instruments, you can get better intonation with that wound G string, or the instrument was designed with that wound G string in mind. So if you're using a string set or a string size that doesn't have it on there, it makes it where it actually, that G string goes out of tune more often than it otherwise would. Because there's that little bit of grip almost from that winding on the string. Where
it affects its ability to stay in tune.
Yeah. It definitely can.
Yeah,
that's one of those things.
I've had some debates with guitarists about what a guitar is built for, especially with that 432, 440 tuning conversation.
Right.
I've had a couple of guitarists who tried to tell me, their guitars are built for 440, which I'm not convinced.
There's certain ones where they might have.
They might
have had 440 in mind. It also depends if it was designed to work with an orchestra, for example, that kind of thing, with concert tuning and all that kind of thing, where everybody's got to be in the same tuning in that respect. So there are certain reasons why you would want to stay to the 440 with the way everybody else has done. But when you have full range,
they do
whatever you want.
Tune to 440 in orchestras. That is kind of where like the standard is implemented the most. Because
one of the things I liked about
the whole purpose of it was to unify tuning. Because before, the early half of the 20th century, instruments around the world were all over the place in tuning, and the instrument makers needed to like kind of get a grip on making instruments for all over the world and having a standard kind of approach to tuning.
Well, that's where certain instruments are also more difficult than others in those terms. Like pianos, for example, you have them tuned a certain way and that's it, right? And brass, exactly. Whereas
you can't tune a brass. That is something that's built to be at a certain tune.
Yeah, and that's where also everybody else sitting in that session would need to tune to the brass or make sure that they're that they line up with the brass. And that's another one of those things where not always a digital tuner is going to save you, because you could be tuned perfectly for 440 and sit down, and one of the instruments that can't adjust in that way is, sounding sharp or sounding flat, and you would be better tuning to them so that you all mesh
otherwise
together.
You're going to have to transpose until, if you're playing against a sax, you got to transpose to B flat.
Mm-hmm. And again, for stringed instruments, that's not a big deal as far as we're just playing, 2 frets over or whatever from where we started from. But yeah, for keys, you would need to, you're playing a completely different key where different sharps and different flats, different fingerings for everything. A lot of mental gymnastics to stay on top of a transposition like that in real time.
Yeah.
Or you just hit the button that says transpose and you go
tougher.
up 2.
I only got so much muscle memory.
Yep. That's where I could cheat though, is if I'm playing in C, I could just do the transpose and then go up a couple and...
Oh, I refuse to hit my...
I keep hitting the same notes, but it transposes it up for me. And that's just one of those, again, that is cheating. I will say that that's cheating. I wouldn't disqualify anybody for using it, but at the same time, that can make it easier to figure something out. For example, if you can play something comfortably in C major, and so you're playing all white notes and your whole song is based on that, but you make so many songs in C major, you decide you want to do something completely different, something that you never do. So a key like G flat major, for example, is one of those that you would likely never use because that's all kinds of black notes.
Now G flat major. G flat major.
That's it. Yep. The thing that's weirdest about that is that B that you
take a little practice.
That fourth note.
I feel like I'm in F sharp minor,
yeah,
except I'm not playing minor.
Yep. And that fourth note, that's not a B, that's a C flat.
Yeah. Which always confuses when it comes to the BC relationship and the EF relationship.
Exactly.
And you get into flats.
Yep.
That's always been a mind fuck to me. Like that's not a B, or that's not a C flat. That's a B.
In this case, that's a C flat because you can only have one of each letter in your things. We got G flat, A flat, D flat, C flat, D flat, E flat, F, and G flat. Because you can only have each letter once, whether you have sharps or flats. So you can't have a B and a B flat. But you can have a B flat and a C flat, which technically ends up at the same notes at the end of the day, which is why we use the names interchangeably, but it's important. And don't mix sharps and flats. Yes, that's important. Kiefer just mentioned. Besides mentioning 23-30 seconds is the best time signature because it can cause seizures, which I agree, that would be very messy.
Yeah, I'd like to see somebody play that.
Yeah, good luck with that. Playing 23 out of 32. And then don't mix sharps and flats, very important. And that's again where everything's going to either have sharps or flats.
Can you imagine trying to count that much in your head? I mean, it's possible for some, but
when you start getting into those messy keys, though, I mean, that once you get to the, once you're using all 5 black notes, right? Like we started at, C major was nothing. We started going around the sharp side. No, we started going around the flat side, right? So we went from C to F to B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. So D flat would be, that one's using the 5 black notes, and then the F and the C. But then when you go to the G flat, you're adding in that C flat to get that B in there. So that's where you get now 6 flats instead of 5, even though there's 5 black notes. Now you're making white notes flat, which...
See, that doesn't feel like an uncomfortable scale though for...
Yeah, because it's that far down the flat side that it's more comfortable. And also the chord is all black notes, right? So
yeah, I'm not playing it properly. Like, you're supposed to do 1, 2, 3 on your finger and then move your thumb.
It depends where the black notes are, whether the fingering, you do whatever fingering works best for you. And sometimes it is not comfortable or it's awkward to start with a thumb or a pinky on a black note. So it's not uncommon to change fingerings for those reasons.
Well, for my right hand, I like to try to stick to that 1, 2, 3, and then slide the thumb for the next 5 and then come back with the 5, 3, 2, 1. Not all scales are created equal there. So
exactly.
Like, this one actually does feel okay though.
And that's where now that you're talking a scale that's way outside your normal zone, where if you're normally dealing with, you know, fewer sharps and flats, this is like way outside that zone.
Yeah, this is the other side of C.
But it's also it's important though to understand like how they feel different and not be afraid of them. And again, the fact that they can feel comfortable. Nice.
Yeah, that's not a bad scale. I could see myself simulating that one.
Yep.
You said that's C sharp major?
That was D flat.
Oh, you put me in the flats, huh?
Yeah, we went down that side. But
that's D flat major.
D flat major.
That's a whole new one for me.
Yep. And that's the one where, again, if we started at the C and we started looking at how many, or started going around the flat side of the circle, we're going C, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. So we're all the way down there at D flat. And then the only other one that you'd see at the very bottom is G flat. And that's the one that has the 6 flats. And then once you're past there, you're coming back up the sharp side, which normally I would go down the other side.
I've almost never explored the flat scales.
Yeah. I remember we talked about F.
I might have played them accidentally or inadvertently, but I've never said my go-to is, B flat major.
Yeah. There's a reason though. I mean, a lot of times, you know, especially with, if people were just getting started with guitar, let's say, the caged system is named that way for a reason, with those 5 chords, C, C, A, G, E, and D being the comfortable open position chords, and also what you can use as a basis for the movable chords later. But each of those chords, they're not on that side of the circle, right? Like once you go down that C, F, everything is B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat. They all have a flat. So like all those other ones that we just talked about, the whole caged system, that's all the other side of the circle. So, you know, from the C, you go to the C to the G to the C, G, D, A, E, B.
And with the guitar, again, it's more of a shift in the claw. So you just bring it down a fret, and now you're in a whole nother scale.
Yeah, and that's why it's more important on the guitar to understand the different forms as opposed to knowing a C scale from a C, from a D flat, from an E, from a whatever. Each of those is just knowing where to find those notes is important, but you don't have to focus a lot of time on learning, you know, the C scale versus the G scale versus the D scale. If it's a major scale, it's a major scale, and it's just sliding to the right place to start it, and also understanding how to start it on different strings. You know, basically, if you can figure out how to start your scale on the 6th string and the 5th string and the 4th string, you know, depending on which of those you want to start from, the fattest or the next fattest or the next fattest, that'll get you a good sense of 3 different places you can play that entire scale and get your ideas across and be able to have some flexibility about where you want to be or where you want to jump to. Yeah. Helps you move around.
Then you got people with the capos. Capos? I always say
capo.
Wrong, but
Yeah, capo is what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, you see people adjust like either with those or, you know, little drop tuning, and next thing you know, you're playing for me the other scales.
For me, the capo, and again, some people would call that cheating, where just making it faster to be able to change keys. But again, that comes down to that same thing I was talking about a second ago, that caged system, where if you're comfortable with those, some people call them the open chords or the cowboy chords, where if you play the open position of those chords, some people, they're either just starting with guitar or they're more of a songwriter, so they're more comfortable with just playing certain position chords, and they don't want to get into all the intricacies of jazz chords and all these other things. They just want to be able to play these 5 chords. But you can change, just like we were saying with the transpose key on the keyboard, that's what the capo is. If you put the capo on the 5th fret, you're now tuned as if your lowest string was A. Yeah, you're barring the whole thing, and then you can use all those open position chords, pretending that the 5 is the 0. So
see, and me, I don't like think of it as cheating.
Right.
My issue with it more is like, especially with acoustic guitars, it affects the sound.
It does.
It affects the tone of the acoustic guitar, especially. And I would rather hear that guitar in its full glory than a somewhat muffled version of that chord.
One that's good to check out is the way that somebody like Albert Collins would use the capo, because for him, like if he's capoed on the 7th fret, right? One of the things that it does is it brings the action way down on the guitar. So even if your guitar is intonated and set up with a pretty high action, once you capo, you're bringing everything down to touching the frets at that 7th fret, for example. So now everything is much closer. So everything, when you're trying to do these lightning fast little kind of lines, you're not having to push the string nearly as far. So they're right there. So that is one of the things that it does. It really brings the action down super low when you use a capo like that, especially higher up on the neck.
So it takes some actual adjustment on the player's brain to compensate for that. To
compensate and to be more comfortable with that. And in his case, he was doing it mostly not for chords as much as he's a solo, single line or single note line kind of a guy. So he's just up there to, again, because it brings the action down and it does make it where certain chords would fit. If you wanted to hit chords there, he could just do open position chords. But I think it was more to bring the action down. And like you said, it affects the tone as well. But in his case, he's just an animal. I mean, he plays with no pick. He would play finger style, but if you hear the attack that he has when he would play with just his fingers, it's like, wow, it sounds like he's like taking a pick and just attacking the string like with a hatchet, but he's completely just finger style. It's crazy.
Was it you who showed me that guy he had like 7 capos?
Oh yeah. That was Trace.
Insane use of
Trace Bundy is his name, I believe.
I mean, he made it sound cool. Like I was like, how's he gonna do this? And
the one song that I remember seeing several times was called Love Song by Trace Bundy, was what it was. We can look it up later, but it is one where he actively moves capos around. Like he'll put capos on the strings and then play right through all the strings and go through. Adrian, that's not the way to get things done. Yeah, that's not going to work.
You're going to get reported. Definitely by me.
First off, we're not doing links tonight. Second of coming in and doing that, we're just not playing your link.
Yeah, we're just going to let BandLab know that you're a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm. And we move on.
Report.
Just like that.
And we say,
bye.
They can ask me for a screenshot. I've got one.
That is not going to work. But as Mr. Sutherland was saying, it'd be like trying to read a book in 3 different languages if you're mixing sharps and flats. And that's true. It would make it that much more difficult. And again, there's also the fact that you don't want to have the same letter twice in your scale for the majority of scales that we're normally dealing with. You're dealing with just if you have a C sharp in a scale, you're not going to have a C, but you can have a D flat and a C, that kind of thing. That's one of the reasons we use sharps versus flats at those times.
But you can't have 2 C's.
Yep, no 2 C's. Can't have 2 F's. Can't have 2 E's.
I mean, 2 C's sounds like that or like this.
You're like, no. Now, the tritone is one I always liked. Going from a 1 to a 4.5. Right between the 4 and the 5. Because that's a messy sound, the tritone.
Actually, that's close to like the warm approach. When I did that one, that was a... God, I forgot my own song.
Nice.
I actually have forgotten my song.
It's been so long.
It's been 2 weeks.
I love it.
The short-term memory. First thing to go.
Well, we're not even going to start talking about double sharps and double flats there, Kiefer, because that's just not right.
Oh yeah, that's another one that I some of my music theory teachers were talking about that, like double sharps and what?
Well, in the same way that we just talked
this.
In the same way that we just talked about that C flat for that beat. Let me get off of this the do's for a second and see if that helps.
You'd be going into those if you were doing a modal shift in one of those keys where
it's actually even just starting in a key.
You're sharpening on something that's already a sharp.
If we follow the same pattern,
have a double.
If we follow the same pattern that we were doing, like if we're going to do sharps, right? If we follow the circle of fifths going around from the sharp side, we're going from C to G, D to A, E to B. And so like we're moving our way up the keyboard like that, right? So we're jumping. And then, once you get to there, it's going to get different because that's where we get from C, G, D, A, E. Then we get to the G flat. That's where you go from the B to the G flat. And then you're on the flat side of the circle, coming back around. But if we keep going the way we were going before, then, you eventually start following that same pattern, you get to the point where you have to double flat or double sharp things to continue to add more scales going down the line. It's a little confusing, but it's kind of the ones that we generally focus on are those, you take those first 12 notes that you got from the C to the B, and you would do them all, working with each of those in that first context of the circle of fifths and get them all in there. And of course, you can learn to slightly learn more things like this, continue to group things together. The big thing is to expose yourself to information a lot. So like the more we look at things like this, even if a lot of what we talk about goes over your head, if even some of it makes sense in some ways, or if only some of it is interesting or whatever, those little bits, those nuggets can lead to other things that we want to try to work on over time. Whether it's, opening your mind up to something like using the sharps and flats in different ways than we talked about before, where notes that are out of key that you start using just because, you realize, hey, let's start exploring. If we're playing in C major, we can start exploring what that sharp 4 sounds like. You wouldn't normally have that in there, but if you did, what would that do for you,
I do like that.
Right. That's right. These are music theory, not music law. That's right. There are suggestions and guidelines that you can step outside of, but it's important to understand why most music stays within certain laws and that there are certain times you can go outside, but just understand what it feels like to make that sound when you get that sharp 4. It's not what everybody's expecting, right? Like if you're playing in the key of C and you suddenly
when you're looking to give them something unexpected, that is when you it's good to know the rules, so that way when you break them, you know why you're breaking them. People can make killer music and have no idea of why it's killer music or why it has the effect it does. But if you do understand the rules, you understand why certain rules sound pleasant and some sound scary, some sound like screeching chalkboards. Understanding the rules helps you to avoid something you don't want to do with your music. If you don't want to have screechy sounding music, then don't do that.
Exactly.
Because it
and
will
understanding
sound bad.
And that's also why I like to try to retranslate everything back to that C major, A minor, because that's getting everything back to the white keys, and it just helps to visualize for me, because all the white keys means we're leaving out all the black keys. Those are the, so we're looking at, if we're using all the white keys, we could be playing in, C Ionian, we could be playing in D Dorian, E Phrygian, F Lydian, G Mixolydian. All of those modes just mean playing all the white notes from this key to that key.
Yeah, apparently I thought I was just playing in C all the time, and Glenn has told me no.
Yep. I mean, technically it's the same notes. So technically all the notes you're hitting, if you're playing in C, if you're staying in the key of C and you're playing all just the white notes, you are technically all playing in, all the C major notes. But if you played all those same notes and you focused on the Gs, like you start and end phrases on the Gs, then you're playing Mixolydian.
Depending on your progression and how you're using those chords inside of that, inside of those notes, is the difference between playing in C major or in one of those modal keys.
Exactly. And like somebody mentioned earlier about going from, I think they were saying from the major 1 to the minor 4. Is that what they were talking about? E major to A minor, I think it was, or the other way around, from one of the majors to the other minor.
Cigarello was saying he went from the E to the A major,
right?
Which is not bad.
And depending on how you look at that,
like almost like a Elton John or a Billy Joel song.
The question is the A the one or is the E the one? Because if the E is the one, that's a minor 1, right? And if the A is the one, it's a major 1. But if the A is the one, it's a major 1 to a minor 5.
Well, going from the E to the A like that, does the A feel like it's resolving?
It does to me, yeah.
It does to me too.
Yeah. So that would tell me that the A is then the 1. And it just means that we're modally shifted. Because how does it feel once you've got that feeling in your head of the E minor to the A major? What does the scale feel like? 3 sharps, right?
If it was A major, you got 2 sharps, right?
I'm thinking 3. I'm thinking the C sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. Yeah, the C feels good there. And actually, that reminds me of a Pink Floyd song right there. From a C to a B.
I was like, son of a bitch, is that a B?
It's like a B minor.
It is a Pink Floyd song, at least those 2 words.
Breathe. That's what I want to say. Breathe in the air.
I can't tell really what key I'm in with those 4 chords. I mean, it's definitely not E minor.
Well, once you find the major chord, right? Check out which one's major, A, right? If A major is there, what do D major?
I'm almost tempted to say, like, with that resolution, it's G major.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then G major, A major.
In G major, all these keys are relevant. You know, there's the E, then the A major, and then a C major to a G. Everything I've hit here is from G major.
Now, to me, I'm thinking we're in actually D major, where, actually, probably no, you're right. G major being the 1, and C and D being the 4 and the 5. So those are the majors that we've got. And then and then with the A minor, sure.
So technically, we're starting on the 6.
Actually, if we're starting on the E.
6, 2.
Absolutely.
That's how Pink Floyd did it.
And I'm still saying there's a B minor somewhere coming in there.
I was tempted to go up to the B minor from the A.
I was even thinking from when it goes to that C. To then the B minor. Back and forth between those 2.
If I was to go to the B minor from the C, it would feel better. Actually use the B as a bridge to this. Or back to the E. That B does like to go to the E.
And even getting that G back involved somewhere.
Does play nice with that.
Very cool. And again, all of it can change up in a heartbeat by just changing to a different rhythm again. If we said even that same idea, but in a salsa beat, let's say.
Salsa.
At 120, that's
like
kind of
the
fast.
Spice.
Yeah. What about salsa at 88?
There you go. Now, this you got to show me how to bounce.
Now, right here, like even just that E minor. which again, that's not necessarily the right chord progression to use for this, but let's see what they do for the Casio chords. If we said, what are we doing? G major, we said? Let's see about G major down here.
I just want to dance.
Little horn stabs. There in the bass part, mostly root 5 and octave right there, just bouncing back and forth between root 5 and octave, so getting a feel for that. And then listening back to it again. Exactly what that is. That's the one.
Oh, if you can play both parts flawlessly, you are a piano god.
Oh, I can't. I gotta go back to normal. That's where the left hand starts doing its own thing. But yeah, if you can get that left hand on autopilot,
it's really one of the trickiest songs to play.
The right hand wants to do the same thing as the left. So it is important to try to split them apart and take the one hand and work that part out solidly, work it to where you can kind of forget about it, then work the other hand out. Let's see here. Ace of Spades. How come I can almost fluently write some rhymes while typing it out, but struggle to do that vocally without writing? It's like pause 95% of the time. Depends. Sometimes the words just do kind of flow. Some songs really do kind of write themselves. It can be the subject matter. It can be you're thinking in a rhyming, rhythmic way that day. I mean, there's all kinds of different possibilities as to why some days it's easier than others. Yeah, but anytime you do get...
I think an understanding of percussion helps vocalists. A vocalist who is good with percussion, I think, has an easier time getting their words to bounce and syllabilize better to the groove.
Yeah, whether it's drumming or even a bass player. That's like something that Tony's mentioned a few times about how bass players make good singers because they focus on and listen to all the rest of the band a lot of the time. They're focused on and they have spent so much time.
Feel it in their belly. Like, you know, a bass player feels the core notes of the song right in their belly because the way they're playing.
Yep. And a lot of times it's a matter of feeling what the song needs, because it's very easy. Like anybody could theoretically pick up a bass and play bass, but for somebody to be able to be good at sitting into any band situation and being able to pick up with and play with everybody who's there and fit in and make it all work, that's the thing, is you're trying to be the glue. You and the drummer, or the rhythm section, you the drummer, and rhythm guitar player, for example, you're the rhythm section. You guys need to be tight. Even if you've never seen each other before, you've never played before, if you guys can sit down and figure out how to get tight by listening to each other and focusing on each other and working together to make the whole thing gel, then everybody else is having an easy time, just smooth sailing about getting their stuff done, because they don't have to worry about the song holding itself together, because we're already doing that. But that's one of those things.
I think that's one of the things with this BandLab approach and laying our tracks down through the editor the way we do. One thing we miss out on these days is being able to look at your band member and nod your head. The way I wrote all my songs with my bandmates back in the day was okay, we're going to change. And, you stare at them and you look at the drummer to know oh, this is where the hit happens.
Yep.
We've lost a lot of that with the approaches we're taking. So we have to find a way to get that back with this kind of approach.
Those signals are the ones that I notice the most with the live bands that I work with. Those kinds of signals, because you're seeing whether it's, because in some bands it's the bass player leading things, sometimes it's the drummer, it changes up in every band. Turns out in a lot of cases it turns out to be my job as the bass player, not that it's my job to give a big signal, but actually, a lot of times
I would look at my bass player the most on stage, because he's the one who had the best signals.
And with me, the signal I'm going to give you is not something like I don't like get all up in your face. And I mean, I am a bit of a cactus when I'm on stage.
It can be just an expression, like, you know, just a certain look in his eye, like, oh, that's where the change is.
In some cases, I don't even have to look. Like when I'm in rehearsals with Joey and Cheryl, for example, a lot of times when it's time for Cheryl to come in with the vocals, like I can feel it coming. So I know where it's coming in. And instead of actually having to like look and, you know, give her a big signal or anything, I can just kind of go from looking where I'm usually just looking at my hand and just kind of like half look at her, just kind of give a little nod, you know, just kind of like up like that. And then she knows that, you know, it's time. And so she's accustomed to looking for that signal. And it's not, again, it's not my job to signal her in, but it's more that I feel it coming. So I kind of make sure that we're all on the same page and everybody can just see it all, because I'm, you know, they're all looking kind of towards the middle, and that's where I am at the time. So,
and I think sometimes it's the singer that benefits the most from the band signals like that.
Oh yeah,
a lot of us were doing it so that the singer would know, like, okay, we're coming out of a solo or part here.
Yep,
go,
here it comes. Yep. And instead of being like go and like and having them drop in on it, you know, right there, you're giving that extra, you know, you're on the end half of the last measure beforehand, giving them, okay, here we go, because, you know, they got to know it's coming so they can get their breath and all that kind of thing going. So
and it's an opportunity to look cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's one of those things, again, that helps everybody get on the same page. But being able to just sit into any or jump into any of those situations and get comfortable, that's one of the things I like about doing open jams or open mics. This last one I went to the other day was, you know, I played with Joey and Cheryl, so it was just the three of us on stage. We didn't have a drummer at all. So it was just Joey was playing guitar, I was playing bass, and Cheryl was singing. And so there are challenges with timing where, you know, I'm used to having a drummer, you know, holding things down. So now it's pretty much on me.
Now it's on you.
Right. It's on me.
In that scenario, you are the drummer.
Exactly. And I have to, that's why I also added in more notes. So in some of them where if I was normally just doing like a doom, doom for a song, I might go do, 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 do. I might actually keep that little bounce going so that I'm keeping the pulse that a drummer would be holding. So I do change what I play if I don't have a drummer there, but it is important to feel that difference and to know where it would be appropriate versus where it isn't. You know, when we're playing something like,
you know, that's also why it's good to sometimes do acoustic versions of your songs.
Absolutely. Yep.
You know, you might have like this electronical masterpiece. Try playing an acoustic version of it, and you'll appreciate that song in a whole different way.
Yep. And as a matter of fact, this particular jam that we went to Wednesday, yesterday, out in Pennsylvania, was at a place that's a kind of a small setup, and the people who played before us were just playing acoustic guitar and microphone. So there's no amps on stage or any of that. All he had was a very small board, like 8-channel input board.
Oh, and that's a better approach for that kind of open mic stuff.
Yeah, and just a skinny little speaker tower. So he didn't have a lot of bass push either. But for my bass, I was offering to use the that DI box that I have that has like really good tone in it and all that. And I can just send him an XLR and he can send me phantom power and I'd be all set. But in this case, he was just like, I can just plug into his pedal board because he had his guitar pedal board down there. So I just plugged into that for just a pure push signal, like nothing really actively being used on the pedal board, but just getting a little bit of push from it. And it worked out fine. But for next time, I would probably just bring an acoustic guitar and we could just play 2 guitars because I can still play bass type stuff on an acoustic guitar, but I could also fill in on the chords when Joey wants to go into lead. So I think I'm just going to suggest that over this next week that I, break out the guitar and we work on some smaller stuff where it's more just, for a smaller place like that, figure out the 2 guitar arrangement for those types of things.
Yeah. For those kind of open mics, I mean, acoustic guitar, you really can't go wrong. Mm-hmm. Assuming you know what you're doing and you get a good acoustic sound, you capture it, you amplify it so that the people in the crowd can hear it. But acoustic guitar is a nice way to just pop up anywhere and perform.
Now, the guy who went on just before us played just an acoustic guitar, and it was an acoustic electric, so plugged in, and just very loud, like very high presence. Like I think he was like louder than our entire set was, and we had an electric guitar and an electric bass and a singer.
Have you seen those pickups they have that like stick on the back of the acoustic, and it's got a speaker?
Yeah.
I mean, it picks up.
I saw one that actually had
acoustic, and
it also had reverb and everything else built into it, so you could add.
Yeah, it has line outs and everything.
Yep, that's pretty sick. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It wasn't a standard piezo, but it had.
It's not expensive either.
No,
I was surprised. Like this thing is like less than $100, and it
and you didn't have to permanently
makes an acoustic guitar into a.
And you didn't have to permanently modify your guitar. It wasn't like you have to cut your guitar open to mount the thing either. It's something I think was magnetic, like something on the inside, something on the outside that just sticks.
Magically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty cool. Yep, RJS saying he uses acoustic when doing a duo. Good to see you, RJ. Enjoying some lunchtime over there, probably.
Oh yeah, when you're playing out RJS, tell me an acoustic is not the easiest to just sit down and get going.
Yeah, well, especially with those two. You know, if you've got that beautiful voice and that guitar.
Yeah, his biggest challenge is like keeping his volume up with Cecily's, because she got some lungs.
Absolutely, beautiful. Can really push the songs out. But that's what I like about the arrangement like that.
When you're dealing with that kind of open mic live situation, that's the only other challenge is whoever's going to sing, you know, amplifying them, giving them some decent effects. You know, a good club where they're having an open mic, chances are you're going to be able to go in and get handed a mic that will just have generally good singing dynamics, a little bit of reverb, maybe some delay, and you know, any singer should be able to jump on that mic and perform.
Yep. And again, it depends on the song. Certain songs do have a much larger, you know, amount of effect that they're looking for a particular song's sound. But for the most part, you can cover most of that just with, you know, that little bit of reverb would just be what you really want to start with. And then if you have to build out from there to get a particular sound, you can.
Yeah. If you keep your sound, when you're doing an open mic or something like this, where you're limited members, no drums, you know, more acoustic like, then a singer compensates for those effects with natural effects. Louder dynamics, you know, the techniques that can make a singer singing in a quiet environment like that sound like they're on a stage.
Yeah. And that's why for me, I have my acoustic electric is actually out in Philly. My buddy Ryan has it, and he was going to be at the gig last night, but maybe we'll see him next week because we're planning on going to this place again. It's called Porter's Pub in Easton, Pennsylvania. It's over by, it's like 90 minutes away from me, so it's not super close. But and it took me almost 2 hours to get there because of traffic. Because it was like, oh, we'll try to be there at like 7:30, and I'm like, all right, so I'm leaving my house at like 5:30, and that's right at traffic time. And I am so close to New York City that I have to fight everybody trying to get out of this area at that time of day. So it was just bumper to bumper traffic. Took me like 2.25 hours to get out there. So it's like, as soon as I got there, it's like, I need a beer.
Yeah.
Good thing they have a micro, you know, it's a microbrewery, so they have all kinds of, you know, all kinds of stuff there to choose from. So I was able to check it all out and look down the chalkboard. Give me one of those. And I'll be back in a few minutes for one of those.
Microbrewery's a good gig.
Absolutely. And again, this is the open jam. So it was, you know, just hanging out. We actually got, I think, third on the list. But my cousin Linda actually was first. She played first. She played just acoustic guitar and sang on her own. So that was very cool. Like, I haven't seen her do that much at all. Like, we've, you know, been around bands together for a long time. She's come up and done a couple songs here and there with us, but she was always like, no. So this was one of the first times I saw her, like, you know, be out in front and just go, you know, get up there and do it. So I was proud. Good job. She actually caught some video of us too, actually, on when Joey and Cheryl and I went. I didn't see it yet because I think she has it on her phone out there. But I couldn't catch video of her playing because, like, I was in a bad spot behind some people and all that. But I'll try to catch some next time.
And I love the whole open mic kind of concept and approach. It really is an awesome way for those who aren't naturally inclined to perform. Me, I'm not a performer. The only time I've had to do it is when I was forced to, because my band had gigs and, I got to play on stage. But I've always shied away from it. With open mics and things like that, it's a good way to actually, like, you know, warm up to the whole concept of playing in front of people without having to go do it on a stage per se.
And actually, I do find there's a really wide mix of people at the open jams where some of them, you know, some of them do seem like they've dealt with bands before, worked with bands before, and they're just kind of out here having fun. Most of them seem like they either haven't been in a band situation before, or they're new enough to their instrument that they haven't done much performing, like you were saying. So in some cases, like if I go out to an open jam and there's a lot of people around and it looks like a bunch of them haven't done much on stage, like I would love to offer to join them and play along with them. Like, hey, you know, if you're doing songs that I might know or can follow along, because you know how I can, you know, fall into a groove. So if they're doing songs that I either know or can easily fall into, I'd be happy to join them and give them that experience of playing with someone on stage. Whereas also I'm perfectly happy to just sit back and be the audience for them, since they might not get as much opportunity to play out on stage. Where it's like me, I've got, you know, I'm in two bands. I get to go on stage when I want to go on stage. And if I go to these open jams all the time, so I have plenty of opportunity to go out and do this. So I can skip tonight. I can, you know, sit back here and just applaud and be part of the audience for you guys tonight. And, you know, but if anybody wants me on stage, I'm happy to join them.
You're awesome that you can actually jump in and fill in and jam with people on the fly like that. That's another tough skill because you pick up things so quick, like the pockets, you pick them up like as soon as they start playing notes. You're a good musician to have around, like, oh, our bass player didn't show up. Well, hey, Glenn's here. It's like, let's give it to Mikey. He'll eat anything.
Exactly. And actually, that's where each of these open mics that I go to, the person running the open jam is usually that guy. Like when we did the place called The Greek on Tuesdays.
Didn't you guys have like a substitute drummer?
We did on Tuesday.
A couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Last week on Tuesday. Yeah, at The Greek.
I mean, that's a musician usually in a band. That's hard to just get on the fly and get somebody who can just snap into place. You know, drums is so important, but a really great drummer, I've only played with two who were like that, who could just come in the room and anything you played, they knew exactly what to play to it.
And in this case, it wasn't even us calling a song name. It was like we called a song name and he's just like he looks over to Joey for the guitar player and he's just give me a sense of the groove. Chugga 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 chugga, and I'll go from there.
Strum a couple of chords, let me see what the bounce is, and okay, I got it.
Exactly. And then we were off to the races. And so we did, I think, 4 songs that way on Tuesday that way. And then again, yesterday was no drummer at all.
Drummers like that have no problem getting studio gigs.
Yeah. And actually, this was the guy, I want to say it was the guy who was running the open mic. So again, that's where each of these ones that I go to, the guy running the open jam will either be sitting in on guitar or sitting in on drums or going back and forth. That guy who sat in on drums for us,
he's an all
played guitar. Filler. He played guitar for the next group that came up.
He fills in drums, guitar, whatever.
Yep. And the guy that we went to last night, he played guitar with somebody else earlier. Somebody went up to sing. So he just learned a song on the fly from the phone, like looking at the chord, you know, looking at the tabs of the chord charts. And then he played a Pink Floyd song on the way out. So I'm like, I'm definitely coming back because I'm going to, you know, get up and sing with him for that or join him for that Pink Floyd song or whatever.
I want to meet this dude. I'd like to see him and Jeff Beck in the same room.
They were because Jeff Beck was there last night.
Throw instruments at each other.
Yeah, Jeff Beck was there last night, but actually he didn't play. He came out to support Linda and to support us, and he didn't actually play. But we'll get him, you know, get him to either bring a guitar or a keyboard out for next time, and we'll get him up there because he sat in with us before with Joey and Cheryl. He's also sat in. You know, he's also part of the band with me and Pepe. Pepe came out also, but he disappeared before we started playing. But it was all good. It was a lot of fun. Just a bit of a long drive was my only thing.
Yeah, it's tough to go through a long drive and then have to jam for like an hour and a half.
I don't mind so much because usually as soon as I get there, I'll go ahead and, you know, grab a beer and kick back and relax and be the audience for the first couple of whatever. Plus they had really good, what did I have? Knishes, bacon and cheddar knishes.
If there's 90 minutes to get to practice, then chances are I'm kind of warmed up by the time I get there because that's a long drive.
Yeah, and I'll sing the whole way out there too. That's the thing is, like, I mean, I'm not usually the singer, but while I'm driving,
puff because a 90-minute drive.
That's a long ride.
Speeds it up.
Let's see what he's saying. Something about cables. Over here, cables brand new. Talking about the acoustics. Too much gain in bad cables causing static. Yeah, I can do it.
Oh, actually, we've been talking about that in the back.
Dirty pots. Dirty pots is another one. Just one of those where if you just turn the volume up and down a bunch of times, like you can work that out. There's also a spray you can put in there to get that out of there.
Well, and you know, gain calibration. Whatever interface you're using, whatever instrument you're using, I don't care if it's a mic for vocals or a guitar or electronic keyboard. Your signals and what you're getting in and the gain on your mixer or your audio interface, gain calibration is the first thing you want to do. And you want to find that sweet spot between any noise, room noise, hiss, electronic noise. You want to make sure none of that exists at wherever you set it. And hopefully you have some headroom because people who jack up to 100 on their gains don't give themselves any headroom going into the mixer or the interface. 75, try to find a sweet spot between 50 and 75. So you can push when you need to, but never push all the way.
you'd be surprised how many times you can seem like the genius sound guy just by coming in and soloing each track and figuring out, okay, this one's at 130%, this one's at 120%, this one's at 110%, like getting them all to a reasonable level and starting
almost
there.
Every guitarist I ask, like where their guitar's main output is, that they're sending their signal, almost 100% are like, oh, it's all the way up.
Yeah. Now, in some cases, I can forgive that in terms of the sound they're going for might need that tone.
Yeah, they're not getting enough signal, and they're putting it at 100. Where I would try to calibrate on the receiving side, like where's your gain at on your audio interface? Is it at 50 and your guitar's at 100? Well, bring your guitar down to 75 and jack up your input on the other one up 25, and try to shift so that each is got headroom.
The other question is, if you're pushing through an amp or you're pushing through a pedal board, if you're pushing through an amp, how much are you trying to get the push on the front side versus how much you're trying to let the amp do the work? It's
and whether you're
pushing each other.
Because some of them are miking their amps, which is cool. Like, I'm not against miking an amp. I would love to get both the line signal and the mic'd amp signal in those cases. Yeah. Give me the clean, give me the mic'd amp, make sure they're separated, and both signals are useful.
And to me, going back to if I'm going to do recording for something like that, I would rather record the guitar clean, and do all the effect processing after the fact, so that we have full flexibility to add, subtract, do whatever we want. The effect is not baked into the guitar track yet. The guitar track is just the notes.
I'm not against a mic'd cabinet
as a second signal.
At the same time, if you're recording that clean signal for me through a line, which isn't going to pick up anything else, it's a nice clean line signal, and at the same time you're getting that guitar, that distortion sound you want out of your cabinet, mic the cabinet, make that track 2, record that at the same time you're recording the clean signal. Wow, can we mix that so much better? And I would use both those tracks, because one fills that distortion fills in the back quieter, while that clean signal is in the front with some post-production effects.
And again, you can volume blend,
make it pop out.
Both signals. You can volume blend. You can push this one at this time. You can push that one at that time. Yeah. Absolutely.
I've had people ask me why I have like 60, 70 tracks in my projects. And it's like, because I do like to try shit, and I do like subliminal layers in my sound. I will have 4 or 5 layers of a sound patch just to get the entire effect of that.
Get that whole signal.
Same with vocals. With the backing vocals and the way that vocals can feel like they're just all around you and build up and build back down.
Oh yeah.
It's all about several layers of low, mid, and highs for those backing vocals.
And in some cases, that Sonatus surround plugin that you were talking about, that allows you to tell the sound where to travel around the microphone and in and out and back and forth, and really draw that whole path out.
Moving the right tracks, the right layers. Backing vocals surprisingly lend themselves a lot to that kind of movement. If you want that kind of choral effect where it sounds like 10 people singing together, and you've got some backing vocals that you counter move on each side, so that like the left goes towards the right and the right goes towards the left, and over the chorus they come in, intersect, and then pass each other and then come back. And the kind of choral effect you can get out of that is like you've got 50 kids singing together or something,
because they're all moving around and just filling that space so well.
It feels like they're rising and falling. It's like when the bands get the whole crowd to sing, on the really good live recordings where, they record the crowd, and Queen had a couple of them, and you can just hear the whole crowd sing in the recording. And a lot of that is that kind of approach and effect.
Yep. One also was from, if if we ever looked at that Victor Wooten bass workshop, where it's like several hours long, but it was a workshop that Victor Wooten did with Anthony Wellington, and it was a couple hours long, and just really good info throughout the whole thing. But in part of it, they're just going over the way that the band can really set up a soloist to really just shine. Like they're setting up a solo for somebody, and they're just playing bass, and so he's just playing bass, and just kind of the song's just kind of going along, and they kind of bring it back using dynamics, right? They build things up a little bit, they bring it way back, they build it way up, and then as they crest that way up and come down, like you hear like the crowd just has no choice, but like they all get up and cheer, and it was just like such a subtle way to kind of work the crowd, essentially, to get the crowd into
or when you have
following that
solos.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that bit, was it you or Jason who showed me that Asian band with the like jazz fusion, two bassists?
No, that was me actually. Juna Sarita and yes. Tokyo Groove Joshi was the band. Yeah.
That one song that you showed me where it had literally everybody in the band got their own solo.
Everybody got the solo.
Minute
passing
and a
it
half,
around.
and it was the perfect example of like how you get the groove going, and they use the build up, and then throw it like a frisbee to the guitarist, and the guitarist goes off, and then after the guitarist is done, she throws it back to the band, and then they throw it to the keyboardist and the sax player. I mean, in that kind of dynamics, everybody gets to show off a little. The audience gets a treat because they really get to hear each musician there independently and together.
And it was also an awesome demonstration of the signals that you were just talking about, where, for example, when it went to the saxophone player, like
you saw that in the video, right? Like,
exactly.
You could see them like to each other, like, you're next.
Yep. And even if it's not like some bands, they'll do it very specifically. Like they'll reach over and be like, you're going, like, but in this case, it would be whether it was when Juna was signaling everybody, she would just kind of look around with like, eyebrows up a little bit, like looking like, everybody ready, right? Just making sure everybody's on the same page. You just get eye contact with everybody. They all know it's coming.
She's pretty much the conductor.
Yeah, but when the saxophone had to take her solo at that one point, the sax here, she's busy, so she can't do as much. She can't be as busy signaling while she's playing. But she did the same move where instead of when Juna looked up and around like this, the sax player just basically did kind of a like the same kind of a move, like move this way, like as if she's looking at all of them, even though she isn't.
And this is a move I don't normally do. So
right.
Like all my normal moves, ignore. When I do this one move,
it's coming.
I'm done.
Yep. And that was cool to see, like, because again, not everybody can be as flamboyant with their signals, but the signals can all still come across. And a lot of times those are the kinds of signals where I hear it coming anyway. Like I don't have to be looking anywhere near the band and I feel it coming because I can hear that
song
build
enough.
Up.
If you play it enough, like eventually you just memorize the parts. It's rare that I had to look at somebody. The only time was usually my drummer, because once we had a couple of songs where you'd come out of the chorus and you'd hold, and the drummer would hold the cymbal for a second, waiting for that smack. And kind of had to look at him because he wasn't a very consistent drummer. So sometimes that smack was 6 beats, not 4.
Sure. Gotta watch. Yeah. Certain things you do have to see.
You just look into his eyes.
Or you just let him hit that one and you come in on the second one.
That was the alternate approach. Is like, okay, I'm going to hit off.
Yep. It's like, I don't have to be right there with you. And RJS is talking about one of the projects we were working on recently, La Villa. And he was saying he forgot about it. Actually, I had forgotten about that. We started working on that. That was one from Tony, actually. We have your Rush track that we started with there.
That song is insane, man.
It's an awesome song. And that's the thing is I took a first crack at the bass line, and there's still a bunch of spots I need to fix, because that's one where that is not a one take kind of song. Like I got a good chunk of it down pretty solid, but I do need to revisit a lot. So I still have work to do there, RJ.
It took me 3 days to completely process what was going on in that. Geddy Lee said when he was interviewed about it, he said it was an exercise in I forgot the exact word he said, but in
self-indulgence, maybe.
Yeah, like complete I guess like how Bach or Mozart sometimes would, or Chopin even would sometimes just be like, look how fast I can play, look how much I can jump. Watch me change 4 times in one measure.
And then when you're playing that song later in concert, you're going, what kind of a jerk wrote this song? That's impossible to play. You're like, oh yeah, that was me. Shit.
Well, they did find a way to like put together such a complex, but yet still pleasing to the ear for their general, like for their fans. That's a great one for their fans. But even somebody who's not necessarily a Rush fan can listen to this song and be like, whoa, that's good music.
And that's a long song, but it has many different musical parts.
A lot of their songs from those albums were 8-10 minutes plus.
Yeah. And I was watching one particular video where they literally did break it up into logical sections where like, here's, you know, and it's like part 9, part 11, part 13, whatever, but it really broke the song up into all those pieces so that you could see there's definitely a structure here. There's definitely a change here. You can see how they're separated for a reason.
Geddy was the main arranger, right? Like he's the one who was really kind of putting the parts in the orders.
I would think so, but honestly, I'm not 100% sure.
I'm gonna have to research into that. I suspect
it always seems like the guitar parts, like Alex Lifeson, it always seems like the parts are very simple, not very showy necessarily, but they add just what they need to get the song across. He always seemed like a very humble player in terms of not
he is a great
super
guitarist,
flashy, but
he's one of those guitarists who came into a band of superhumans. I mean, between Geddy and Neil Peart, I'd rather
can't go wrong there.
I'd rather be a humble guitarist in a band with Neil and Geddy than a killer guitarist with somebody else.
We've talked about that wall of sound that those 3 guys can make. It was like, wow. I mean, it's impressive.
They're one of the few 3 man bands that I have a hard time believing or understanding how they accomplished what they did live that way. But they did.
Absolutely. They did. And actually, I think I've seen them live a couple of times. I think one of the times I saw them live at the Garden, I don't know if it was the Roll the Bones tour, but I think it was around that time.
Would have loved to go on that tour.
And I want to say that at that time, they did have a keyboard player playing with them live. I don't remember who it would have been, though.
Yeah, as they went on in the 70s is when they were really like, Geddy was doing all sorts of foot shit that was like, oh my God, he's not wasting an appendage. Like every single appendage is making noise.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a great grasp of triggers, and looping at a time when the technology wasn't that impressive through the 70s. I mean, they were doing that shit like early 70s.
Mm-hmm. What these guys are talking about, if you make a bad note, it's best to repeat it, gives it a modal tonality. It's the I meant to do that. It's like I meant to do that so much I did it twice.
or
and that makes it sound
shift into a bad chord. Totally fuck with them.
Yeah. Go atonal for a moment, and then when you come back, it's even better of a resolution.
Yeah, at this point, I'm really double guessing what I think sounds bad.
Exactly.
Things that I used to think sounded bad, I'm now approaching and realizing, like, depending on how I approach this, if I pause for a moment, then hit the bad chord, it doesn't have the same effect as if I'm trying to play something fluid and oops, I fucked up and there's a bad note. Isn't the same as like, this was happy, but now it's scary.
Yep.
Totally sometimes it takes a bad chord in order to make that feeling happen.
That's also one of the places where we talked about how nobody really uses diminished chords, right? Like we skip that 7, we don't really talk about that 7th chord, but that's one of those places where if you really need a total break from what's going on, like, you're playing in your regular, your 1s through 6s, right? You got your 1, your 4, your 5, your 2, your 3, your 6, you're doing all that stuff. But if you want to really jump out of that box for a second, if you just throw that little diminished run in there, you get that fully diminished chord, and you just go like you do it on a guitar. You just like run up the neck because it's the same claw, and you can just take that claw and move it up.
Can you think of any style where they utilize diminished chords more?
Absolutely. Actually, that's one of the videos that I had
thinking
set up.
Actually in certain metal when you mentioned it.
There is, it's not just metal though. They had one of the videos that I was going to show tonight, but we're just going to probably talk about it next time a little bit, was a video where it was songs utilizing diminished chords. So it's ones that we can actually look at actual song examples where they utilize diminished chords and in what way they utilize them. You can see the context of how they get used in to kind of break up a song like that.
When I think with those, I think the slide down effect, you know, that like that one I had, it was like, nice. That's what I think when I think diminished, is that kind of.
Well, for me, if we're looking at the to get the really diminished sound, like if you were to start with major or start with the C major scale, so we're using all white notes again, and we just went up with each one, like we went with a major 7, minor 7. We just keep hitting 4 notes at a time going up. We get to that B. To get fully diminished, you would bring that top note down to, so you got B, D, F, and A flat.
So fully diminished would be sliding everything back a half step.
It's basically the minor third, a flat 5th, and a double flatted 7th. That's the tricky part, because it's actually like using the 6th, but it's a double flat.
Technically it's A.
But the thing about it is, if you take that and you start looking at the inversions,
that's crazy.
Now you look at the inversions of this. You put the B on the top. It's the same chord going up, those same 4 notes. You just change the inversion, and you can just keep running that up and down the whole keyboard.
Oh, and you can write songs for Disney back in the 40s because they did shit like that.
Yep. It's a great turnaround chord, like RJ said. It's also a great chord for, some people call it like the detective chord, or one of those things where in a mystery program, like something happens unexpected. You get that, like.
So that is a fully diminished chord?
Because we're using the flatted 3rd, the flatted 5th, and the double flatted 7th.
Yeah, that double flatted is really that is the like spice there. Really is unusual versus that would have been single flatted, which is not bad either. If you were to think,
you can go back and forth.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Diminished and augmented, like Kiefer says, causing tension in music. The augmented is that sharp 5. So that would be where you're using, like, if you were in C major to C augmented, going from the C, E, G to the C, E, G sharp.
Yeah, I can work with that.
Same note, but used in a different way. Instead of the other. But the diminished is definitely one of those that we don't use often, but when you can use it strategically in the right places, it's amazing. Yeah, horror movie music is a great place for it.
Well, it's like the flatted scales we were talking about earlier. Again, I don't recall any flatted scale in the 30 plus years I've been playing that was like a go-to for me. The one you showed me tonight, I think, was the most comfortable one I've tried.
Nice. And that was the one that's all the way around the circle, where you're almost all back on the sharp side again.
Yeah. And
that's where we can start.
It's easy enough to roll, you know, in the standard scale way.
Yeah. Well, even if we're looking at, like, when we start moving through the scales, right, the way that I would do it is to start with that C, and then go to the G. Or, like, if we're going the sharp side, then you go to the G. You're adding that 1 sharp, and then you would go to the D with the 2 sharps, and the A with the 3 sharps. So you're just kind of going one at a time around the circle of fifths to see and how they all are. If you go around the other way, the flat side, that's where you're going from C, and then you go to F, that has the B flat. Then you go to B flat, that has the B flat and the E flat.
See, you memorized how many sharps there are in the scales. That's the thing that when I try doing a scale, I'm not thinking, oh, this one has 3 sharps. I really should burn that in my brain. I've known it long enough.
That's where using the circle of fifths can help with that, because if you're starting close to that C at the beginning,
Well, I know what a major scale is supposed to sound like. So if I pick a note and I say like, so if I'm gonna walk through this from this note, a major scale is supposed to sound like. So I have programmed my brain to what a major scale should sound like. So any note I start on, it's like, okay, how many flats are there or how many sharps? I just hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 until it sounds proper, and then try to burn it into my brain as I try to explore it.
Yep. And that's also where you can derive the scale each time, because you know that it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And you can always rederive that looking back at C major.
Memorizing the pattern there. Like, I don't know why I have a tough time with the whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's it, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to try to derive it on the fly, but
it's the same reason why I'm slow with sheet music. You know, every good boy deserves fudge. That's how I read sheet music. So I have to remind myself, like, oh, G clef, that's what these notes are. Which note is that? You know, it's not like somebody who's in an orchestra puts sheet music up, never played the song, and just goes. It's difficult when it's not natural reading.
Now, what Kiefer just mentioned there is something that helped me remember the circle of fifths as well, which is the word B-E-A-D is actually in there twice. If you look around the flat side, if you start from C and you go around the flat side, it's C, F, and then you got B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. So that's that word B-E-A-D is all in there. Then you got the G flat. Then you have the word bead again, B-E-A-D, G-C, and you're back to the top. So like if you have it written out and you kind of just look around it that way, it makes it easier to kind of see. And it's good to have up on, whether it's on screen or just as a reference point somewhere in your room where you can be looking at it and you know, for example, it's got the circle on the outside showing like C, G, going around that way. And then right inside of that, they usually have the relative minors. So you see that the A minor is relative of C, and you see what, the E minor is the relative of G, and it helps to lock those in.
Now, the relative minors, I've always been, I mean, it's pretty easy there. Like whatever key I'm starting on, if this is major, then 2, 3 steps down, right? 1,
yep,
2, 3.
3 half steps down.
So,
and again, I always rederive that from the C and C major, A minor relationship, where I can just walk down those 3 half steps from the C to the A to re-verify that.
I can always find the one, the relative minor 1 to a major. Being ready for that scale is the tricky part. Like I'm getting pretty good at certain major scales. The relative minor takes a little more practice for me.
Yeah.
But it's the one that once I do practice, it really is more my go-to. I like minor with piano.
And he's got the order of the flats. He's saying the B-E-A-D is also the order that the flats go in, where when you start a song that has 1 flat, is going to have a B flat. If a song has 3 flats, it's going to be a B flat, E flat, and A flat. And it's always going to be in that order. So any song that has more than 3 flats definitely has the B flat, E flat, A flat, and others. So it's easier to remember that the most common flat you'll see is the B flat. The second most common flat you'll see is the E flat, because of all the keys that have flats in them, they're all going to have those in there if they have more than 2.
Yeah, basically bead backwards.
Yep. And the sharps backwards. Yeah, relative minor for most of the solos. That's definitely a good trick, RJ. If you're playing in C major, you could do most of your soloing in A minor, for example, or that would be using the relative minor. To use the borrowed chords, you could try to do C minor, but that would be different because you wouldn't want to play that against C major chords is the main thing. But there's always a lot of options, different ways to do things. Main thing is having good mnemonic devices, good ways to remember things. And that's where, again, for me, having that circle of fifths as a good foundational piece of information and just something that you can stare at while you're playing. Another thing I like to do is I'm a visual guy in a lot of ways. So like having something on screen where I can see, the scale that I'm playing, like the entire neck. If I'm playing in A minor, just A minor, I like to have a visualization on screen that shows me all the notes of the neck that are A minor, and I can, not because I need them to know where I am, but I can look at different sections and I'll just see.
Actually,
okay,
some of those charts you showed me, when you see them color coded and the alternate patterns, when you see them all that way, it really does make sense. The whole cage system claw approach.
Yep.
I feel like I actually have learned more guitar in the last year than I have keyboard knowledge.
Oh yeah. And actually, there was another one that I was thinking about looking at for today. We'll save it for another time. But it was one that was a connecting little, like little lead lines on the guitar with the A, E, and D chord shapes that we were talking about. Those three major, or the three main chord positions where you're rooting on the E string, the big fat string, 6th string, or you're rooting on the 5th string, or you're rooting on the 4th string. And if you get those under your hands, or you can do these little, you do a little phrase and then hit this chord, and then you do a little phrase and you hit this chord, and do a little phrase and you hit that chord, and you're working essentially lead lines in between your chords for progression. So now instead of just playing progressions where you're just playing a chord and then a chord and then a chord, you're actually putting in little connecting lines and little runs, and you're getting more of a feel of the music aspect of, you know, now you're playing rhythm and you're playing some lead to get a little interest going. You're kind of playing the Bob parts and the Jerry parts. You know, you're trying to get both of that balanced in there a little bit. So it's definitely some interesting stuff that we'll explore.
A lot of times, depending on the way I'm playing a certain part, I end up writing the melody with the way I, invert the chords. And
yeah, absolutely.
What ends up going on in the middle of usually like these two fingers tends to be where the melody ends up driving, or what I hope, like a singer or, lead someone instrument. Doing a lead on top of it is going to follow that middle part.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Definitely all kinds of good sounds and different ways to approach things. Some of it can be with, again, the different rhythms or the different speeds. Changing the speed of what you're doing can be a great way to change things up. Even changing key, like we were saying, sometimes you get comfortable with certain keys, and just shifting to a completely different key that you're not familiar with and figuring the song out in that key is both a great exercise for learning the fingerings in that key, but also to hear how the song sounds different in that key. Because we were talking about how G feels like the happiest key sometimes, but you could play something in D flat and have it sound just as happy. You don't know until you try. So like play the same song in D flat and see how that sounds or feels.
That's the one you had me do earlier, huh?
I think so, yeah.
D flat major or minor?
Yeah, yeah.
That's the D flat.
Yep. Along with the F and the C.
This is... I think I got this. After I practice it a couple times. would take me a couple of hours of riffing.
But getting comfy with it, and that's the thing
it is a comfortable scale. Again, the muscle memory, just figuring out like where the rise up and getting familiar with that fucking flatted.
And getting comfy with this, if you go through the same way that we went through the C major, where we just started with, C, E, and G, and just went up through the scales. Do the same thing with this one, where we just go up with all the different diatonic scales in that scale.
You know what I'm noticing? If instead of doing the scale itself, which does help just to kind of memorize like what's what, going up in thirds.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
because that's keeping majors and minors.
Helps me to rememorize it faster.
Definitely.
What I'm going to start doing third runs until that burns in my head. Because if I can memorize the two things that I'm usually playing next to each other, I do a lot of thirds. So if I really want to get comfortable with the scale that I'm about to play, I need to be able to do those.
It's also where you'll most immediately hear whether it's right or wrong, because you'll hear that difference whether you're hitting major and it should be minor. You'll hear that for sure.
Yes. It helps me to calibrate better than just like the single note all the way up.
That's also with when you're trying to find what someone's playing. That's another great way to do that. Where if someone's playing something in that key, whatever that was, you try to figure out what that was. If that was F sharp.
Told me.
But all you'd have to do is, like, if you start hitting thirds, like, you wouldn't find it there, but you'd find it on once you get over onto the the sharps. But anyway, finding your way to whatever note someone's playing, and then immediately trying the third, so you find out if it's a major or a minor. That way, if you're going to have wrong notes, it'll be right there together. Whether it's the wrong root note and the wrong third, or the right one.
You're actually going to figure out whether it's the right or wrong note faster, because it only takes me 2 jumps here. It only takes me 2 jumps to hear with anything else that's playing to know whether I'm in the right key or not. If I don't get it here, I'm going to know by here if everybody else that's playing, if I'm not playing a right note, pretty much should have it by this. There.
Yep. And just like Kiefer said there, 1's major, 2's minor, 3's minor, 4's major, 5's major, 6 minor, and 7 we don't talk about. 7 is diminished.
That's part of this I.T.
That is.
We went
there are
diminished.
There are places we'll use it, and there's times to use it, but it is one that is infrequently used and best used with caution. But yes, the other 6, you can go all day having all kinds of fun with 1 through 6, and as long as you're doing the majors and minors at the right place, you're all set.
And again, that's the infrequent ones right now that I'm the most curious with.
Yeah.
And why they're infrequent, because they're not all bad. There's some good potential material there.
Absolutely. Lots of good stuff in there. And that's where, again, that would be if we were playing in just a standard major key. If we were playing something that was in Mixolydian, for example, like if we were playing G Mixolydian, that brings us to where now we were playing as the 5 chord. We changed where we're playing as if the 5 chord is the 1. And now we're playing G Mixolydian, where now that's major, right? But that means that the 2 in G Mixolydian would be that minor, because that's like the 6. The 3 would be diminished. The 4 would be major. The 5 would be minor. The 6 would be minor. And the 7 would be major. So it's kind of take that whole structure that we just looked at and shift everything as if you're starting on the 5. And that's kind of a way to kind of explode your mind a little bit about the way that they're all related together. But it's one of those that if you think about it a little bit, and it's one of those that you revisit that same concept a few times and it makes more sense over time. If we were playing in Dorian, we'd be starting on that 2. So it's like minor to start with. And then the 2 from Dorian would be that E minor, F major, G major, A minor, E diminished, C major, back to D minor to get that Dorian sound. So just one of those things, the way to kind of relate the different modes together and see where they fit on that whole sliding structure of 1 major through 7 diminished. And that's where same thing. If you're in minor, you're starting at the 6. So the 1 is minor, the 2 is diminished, the 3 is major, and everything shifts over that way.
See, you remember patterns.
Yes, I'm a very pattern-oriented
I'm usually
guy.
I'm good with a lot of patterns, but with the musical ones, it starts to feel like algebra.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
It's a math I can understand, especially when I have to program, but it's not the one that like memorizing these musical patterns, implementing them in the performance and getting them into the muscle memory, that is the modern day challenge.
And like Kiefer just said, you can look at it that way, but only Ionian and Aeolian define the key, the major key or the minor key. But one way that we were looking at it is before we were talking about if it was an E major to an E minor to an A major, you would normally never have that because the 1 and the 4 would either both be major or both be minor. If you're in a major key, the 1 and the 4 are both major. If you're in a minor key, the 1 and the 4 would both be minor. But if you're playing a minor 1 to a major 4 or a minor 1 to a major 4, if they're opposites, major and minor, then you're playing in one of the other modes. And you can try to figure out which mode it is by playing the other chords that would fit diatonically in that key, and you'll determine whether whether what you think is the 1 is actually the 4 or the 5 maybe. If it's a major key, those would be your choices. So like he was saying about G Mixolydian, if you were starting with a major key on G Mixolydian, normally your 3 chord from a normal major chord would be minor, but in this case it would be diminished because that'd be diminished.
You said minor to major 4. That's
if we were going a minor 1, like we went E minor to the A major. That was the example we were doing earlier. And I was just saying that anytime that the 1 and the 4 are not the same as far as major and minor, if one of them is major and one of them is minor, then you're not playing in a standard major key or a standard minor key. So you might be doing something that has a Mixolydian sound or a Dorian sound or one of the other modes. It's a matter of figuring out which.
You just explained what one of my old songs is, because I've been trying to figure out what the hell I do at the end of it, which I think it is what you just described there. I'll show it to you after. Looks like we got Steven in the house. Where's the mask?
Yeah, I think he slid through.
He's the man.
I think he didn't want to disturb us on the way through, but he's welcome to join us anytime.
There he is.
As if summoned. There's
Be the mask.
Good to see you, man. Hopefully tomorrow in Australia is looking good. All right. 2 thumbs up.
Now Electronic Thursday on Friday.
Hey, what's up, Pandemon? The Worm Brothers.
Hey, Ben.
We are, in essence, just finishing up on our part here and getting ready to start Soul for his electronica for the rest of the evening. Some good stuff.
Well, that was some awesome exploration, man.
Can I be heard?
Yes. We hear you fine.
Okay, cool. Just setting up my mic.
Nice.
I had it on quite quiet because I was recording vocals before.
No, it sounds quite good now.
Tried to turn it off again. Yeah, had to crank it.
Nice. Good stuff, man.
So, what you got for electronics?
Well, I got a little list, a bit of electronic goodness.
Nice.
Yeah.
Goodness for everybody.
We'll toss it off to you.
Yes, indeed. Good to see
you
everybody.
Ready now, are we? All right.
Enjoy the rest of the evening, and we will catch you next time.
And awesome talk, Glenn. And all you guys out there, Kiefer. Great stuff, man.
All righty.